Well, I haven't been in serious trouble with the media for about 3 days, I think. So it's probably time to do something that'll...
What do they come at you for?
Jesus, I don't know, really.
The feminists, it's got to be because Muslims right now are higher up on the victim hierarchy than them. So even if it's way over there, they're not allowed to speak out against it.
I think it's their unconscious wish for brutal male domination.
I don't think so.
Man,
I like that. That's fun.
They can't really figure me out because what I'm doing isn't really political. It's psychological, and I am a clinical psychologist. I've been writing these books to help people. There's other reasons as well. They have to make everything political, and I don't quite fit that mold, and so I don't think they know what to do with me. And
they want to put you in a box.
Yes, and then bury the box, and then burn the ground, and then salt the earth.
They want you to say I'm left or I'm right, and you're like, listen, I'm neither. I'm watching both sides and making my own decisions. That's how I see you. I don't know if that's true or not, but
making people bake a cake for a gay wedding.
Making them do it?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a very good idea.
But here's the argument. So should they be able to deny making a cake for a black couple if they don't like black people?
Allowed to? Probably. That doesn't mean it's right.
Okay, so then we had the civil rights movement where they said black people, you had to serve them in your restaurants and stuff like that. And it did work and it did make our society better. But would you argue that that still wasn't right?
No, that was right.
Why is that different to now if you didn't want to make a cake for black people?
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not different. Yeah. Maybe I was wrong about that.
So if it's not clear, I can point to the giants. I can't point to the mega giant. And
it's because it's an abstraction.
Sure, but when you hold Christ up as a particular figure, the only information that I have about Jesus comes from the Bible. And rather than going through all of it again, because there's lots of people with questions, if you go to ironchariots.org, you will find a verse-by-verse deconstruction of the Sermon on the Mount where I point out that Jesus gave some good advice and some crappy advice and some questionable advice, and that's not enough. And there's not a secular humanist organization or country on the planet that has ever produced as a good thing, an intentional good thing, rapists and murderers. So,
well, that's highly debatable. That's highly debatable.
Actually,
I mean, one
it's
of the things
absolutely true because there's never been a secular humanist government on the planet.
I don't know. I think the Soviets were pretty secular.
No,
humanists.
Then,
well, I know
with all due apologies, you do not know the first thing about what secular humanism is. You should read the Secular Humanist Manifestos because what happened in Russia in communist countries was an institution of a religious-like structure centered around an individual and forced atheism, none of which is consistent with humanism. None of it. And we can talk about this later, and I'll be happy to point you to this because you can say that it was an atheist thing that went awry, but you can't call it secular humanism. It's just not there. There's no humanism in what was done there. But
under Mao, millions of people died.
Right.
I mean, there's no comparison between Mao and a trans activist, is there?
Why not?
Because trans activists aren't killing millions of people?
The philosophy that's guiding their utterances is the same philosophy. What are we going to do? Repeat the persecution of women? Do you think that's a realistic possibility?
Yeah, we're sitting here.
How do you see that?
We're sitting here in America, right, where we've just had a 5th judge appointed to the Supreme Court who is now anti-abortion, he's now conservative. I think that abortion rights are absolutely fundamental to women being able to function as full humans in society, and I think that is now under threat in America. I think it is extremely smug and complacent to think civilization has peaked, it's all upwards from here.
Yeah, well, good luck with that.
Everything that I try to do, I tend to view in the form of propositional reasoning. So when we talk about the narrative...
Yeah, that's a problem, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you can't reduce the world to a set of propositions.
Why not?
Oh. Look.
Show me something that is true in the world that is not a proposition.
Like an
you cannot
explicit,
put in
statable proposition?
Something that is demonstrably true that I could not put in a proposition.
Oh, that's easy.
Okay.
Sure you want to go there?
I'm not afraid of anything.
Okay. Okay.
if I'm wrong, I want to know I'm wrong. But I'm trying to, for years I had this thing going where people would say, oh, and this is kind of what we're getting at from a different angle. I would say they would be afraid of what we would lose if we lost religion. And I basically said, demonstrate to me any benefit.
Oh, you'd lose art and poetry and drama and narrative and story.
Are there no godless artists and poets?
Well, there are artists and poets who think they're godless.
So we might have crossed over into a problem area because
no doubt.
I can't draw for crap, although I do draw during the show. But one of the individuals who came to the show the other night handed me something that she had spent a great deal of time drawing. She's a wonderful artist. I'm very grateful to get it. And, you know, while I pretend to read minds on stage, I constantly acknowledge that I can't actually read minds. So I can't tell you whether or not she actually believes in a God, but I can tell you that I actually don't believe in a God, and I could write poetry. But you act like you do. Huh?
But you act like you do. That's why you didn't want to throw poor Sam off the stage.
No, now you're making a claim. Okay, so I'm telling you I don't believe there's a God. And your response to that is, I really do, because I have a moral sense. But my moral sense is utterly without any appeal to a God.
Explicitly.
Or implicitly.
Maybe. That's not so obvious.
Okay, it's really
because you regard Sam Harris as an implicitly valuable entity. Because otherwise you'd just throw him off the stage. And then the question is, well, just exactly why is he an implicitly valuable entity? What's your metaphysics of that?
I don't think he's implicitly valuable in the sense, I don't think he's implicitly valuable in the sense that the universe has implied that there's something explicit about it. For me, morality is far simpler than some people.
Now wait, you sounded doubtful about that. You know that, like
maybe you're the mind reader.
Well, maybe.
Because you've already suggested that despite me sitting here and having talked about this for decades, that I don't believe in God, that I actually do because I have a moral code. But my moral code, which I was
more specific. I said it was because you didn't want to throw Sam off the stage.
Yes, but you didn't even attempt to ask me why I didn't throw Sam off the stage. Instead, you went to, why do you think Sam has implicit value? Because it seems that in your narrative,
I'm willing
that's
to go
the
there.
only justification.
Well, maybe you were afraid of being punished.
I think you no.
Oh,
I think you can have a perfectly acceptable foundation for secular morality, even if it fundamentally centers around selfishness. I'd rather not be thrown off the stage. It's in my best interest to encourage that sort of understanding in others, and therefore I will not throw him off the stage.
You're saying that trans activists could lead to the deaths of millions of people?
I'm saying that the philosophy that drives their utterances is the same philosophy that already has driven us to the deaths of millions of people.
Okay, tell us how that philosophy is in any way comparable.
Sure, that's no problem. The first thing is that the philosophy presumes that group identity is paramount. That's the fundamental philosophy that drove the Soviet Union and Maoist China. And it's the fundamental philosophy of the left-wing activists. It's identity politics. It doesn't matter who you are as an individual. It matters who you are in terms of your group identity.
You're just saying these things, though, to provoke, aren't you? I mean, you are a provocateur.
I never say
You're like
anything.
the alt-right that you hate to be compared to. You want to stir things up.
I'm only a provocateur insofar as when I say what I believe to be true, it's provocative. I don't provoke. Maybe for humor,
you don't set out to
now
provoke.
And then. I'm not interested in provoking. I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to because it's just so goddamn funny. I can't help but say it. I figured out how to monetize social justice warriors.
That is what it is.
I know, it's so funny. Remember those 50s hat-sporting fathers who stayed married, supported their families, and repressed women? Well, they're headed for extinction. In the majority of U.S. cities, young women are now higher paid and more educated than their male counterparts. This has not stopped the Globe and Mail's Margaret Wente from recently warning us about the dangerous male energy still remaining. Men with less testosterone are nicer, more social, and less aggressive, she says. Such men won't, quote unquote, wreck the world. At this point, Wente should know that it's the testosterone-laden man who is most attractive when women are fertile. when it comes to this serious business of sex, women will choose a testosterone-charged world wrecker most of the time. What then is a sensible girl to do? Ms. Kate Bollock provides some answers in the cover story of November's The Atlantic. Bollock, with too many ex-boyfriends to count, is still unmarried at 39. 11 years ago, however, she ended a long-term relationship with Ellen, who is exceptional, intelligent, good-looking, loyal, and kind. Something was missing, Bollock says. Had she asked me, I would have said, not enough testosterone. And you were asking about courage earlier, you know. One of the things that I have watched quite frequently is the way that people respond to being mobbed on Twitter.
Yeah.
You know, now I've almost stopped looking at Twitter. It's been about 3 months that I've taken a Twitter hiatus, let's say. I still post, I don't even have my password anymore. I send what I want to post to a third party and they post it because it keeps me out of the...
An antiseptic distance.
That's right, exactly. And that's exactly the right way of thinking about it. You know, people, civilized people, and I mean that in civilized, socialized people, cannot tolerate being mobbed. Because,
no, they can't.
Because, and there's a reason for that. You see, you said, with regards to the British Columbia Human Rights Tribunal, you know, if there's 16 people on one side and one on the other, you might be thinking that the 16 people are right.
More or less.
Right. But then you think of the situation where you've said something on Twitter and, you know, 1,000 people mob you publicly. I mean, your first response, your first response is going to be to examine your own conscience and see how you transgressed. It's not really much different psychologically. I mean, it's lesser, I suppose, but it's not that much different than waking up one morning and coming to your door and finding a mob of your neighbors angrily aggregated on your lawn. You know, it's a terrible shock for people, and it really hurts them. You know, they're often, by all accounts, you know, damaged for lengthy periods of time by this, and their first impulse is to apologize, which is truly the wrong thing. Like the right thing to do.
It's stand.
Well, the right thing to do is to understand that if you haven't done anything wrong, you don't apologize. Now that's very difficult. It's very difficult. And then to wait, because if you wait 2 weeks, people will come to your defense.
Yeah, they will.
But it takes the people who will come to your defense 2 weeks to get their act together, where it takes the activists who are unbelievably organized 15 seconds to mob you. That'll keep the testosterone flowing.
Well, simultaneously, others are corrupting the ecological foundations, the social foundations. Democracy is arguably dying. There are real problems that are existential threats at a different level.
There's a whole large variety of existential
And I don't
threats.
think that's happening principally because some people are being taught feminist theory in the University of Toronto. It's not that. It's something else, much bigger and broader and deeper, that when people raise these issues, you focus on that small issue, not the big ones that they're worried about.
Well, it depends on the issue, I suppose. I would say that...
climate change, for example, just for argument's sake.
Well, what should I say about climate change?
Well, what should you do
if you drive here?
If you're... No, I didn't.
What did you do? How did you get here?
I took public transport.
Okay, well, you know.
But that's not really... But again, that's hardly the point.
How have I prepared for my debate with Zizek? What are your goals for the conversation to be productive? Well, I haven't prepared enough. But I've got tomorrow. You know, and you can do a lot with one day.
Do you feel like a serious woman who does not want sexual harassment in the workplace, do you feel like if she wears makeup in the workplace that she is somewhat being critical?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think that. You know, I've also been accused 3 times in my career of sexual impropriety. There's all these people in the US who are on the conservative side who are aligned with Trump for all sorts of reasons. And there's all this tension around his presidency and attempts to pull him out of his office for various reasons. And like, what do you think will happen if that comes to pass? What do you think will happen to these people that have identified with Trump? And like, how is it that Democratic types, for example, are holding out their hand to say to these conservative types, sort of like, welcome back into the fold? Because it looks to me, from an outsider's perspective, that your country is polarizing in a way that's not good, and that, you know, people are going after Trump. And I understand that. It's not like I don't understand that. But there's all these people that elected him and that are identified with him, and they're not taking this well, you know, and so, well, they're not, it's not, and, you know, you might not think they're very bright and all of that, and you know, they're backwards and all of those things, but you know, you need to have respect for the rest of your citizens. And
yeah, I know. So the teachers are saying, I think it's more of a human rights issue, right? This is teaching our little kids.
Fucking pricks.
And if your country isn't going to pull itself apart, and I really see this happening from an outsider's perspective when I come down here. And I lived in the States for a while, and it wasn't like this before.
If he was just a regular Republican president with Republican policies, I would say you'd have a point. But what is so alarming is the assault on democratic norms, what we were talking about here today. Things like threatening to put people in jail, threatening to put journalists in jail, wanting military parades, praising dictators, wanting to be a dictator. I mean, we are at a moment here, I try to impress on the people who are too young to remember a lot of presidents and a lot of elections, how incredibly different this is than anything that ever came before. I never much liked the other Republicans who were in office, but I have a renewed respect for them. George Bush and Mitt Romney would not have tried to pull this shit.
I'm confused about how this dovetails with your thesis that the left is too preoccupied with being non-confrontational. Right?
The left is too preoccupied
just that
with
we are.
That's interesting.
Okay, no, all right.
No, that's a good question.
But the idea that liberals, especially intellectuals, are preoccupied with politically correct speech, that they're not.
I see.
And yet.
No, they're too preoccupied with identity politics by a large margin, and they tend to categorize everyone by their ethnicity and their sex and their gender, and I think all that does is turn people into tribal actors, and that the end result of that is catastrophe.
But weren't you also saying, though, that the left is too worried about offending people?
I think that goes along with...
I will.
Yes,
right.
yes, well, that goes...
But then on the other hand, when the left, for example, offends people in the political sphere, you're questioning whether that's somehow bad for society writ large.
Well, I'm concerned about, I think that those two issues are,
One of the things you're famous for saying is that you found it difficult to debate with certain types of women because the normal things you would have recourse to if you were debating men are not available to you. And what you meant there was you couldn't hit her.
No, I didn't mean that.
You didn't mean that? You meant,
well,
what did you,
I
tell me what you meant.
I didn't mean that at all.
Tell me what you meant.
It's known among men that there are limits to the manner in which you can interact, and that those limits don't necessarily apply when you're dealing with women, especially women of a certain sort, and there's no way of regulating that, and that's a big problem. You know, this is something my wife has pointed out too. She said, well, men are going to have to stand up for themselves, but here's the problem. I know how to stand up to a man who's unfairly trespassing against me, and the reason I know that is because the parameters for my resistance are quite well defined, which is we talk, we argue, we push, and then it becomes physical, right? Like if we move beyond the boundaries of civil discourse, we know what the next step is. Okay, that's forbidden in discourse with women. And so I don't think that men can control crazy women. I really don't believe it. I think that they have to throw their hands up in it's not even disbelief. It's that there's no step forward that you can take under those circumstances, because if the man is offensive enough and crazy enough, the reaction becomes physical right away, or at least the threat is there. And the missing morality. That's all I meant.
You also told Joe Rogan, if you're a young, because you wanted to clarify what you meant, if you're a young man and all the women are rejecting you, then who's got the problem? It's not all the women. That's a very bad road to go down.
Yes, that's for sure.
I imagine a lot of people would have been very happy to hear you say that.
I've said it repeatedly.
Indeed.
I mean, I've talked to men continually about the fact that they need to grow up and accept responsibility.
Over a six-month process, we had that series of statements from you. Speaking clearly is one of your 12 rules. And I wonder why it is that in a situation like that and in many other situations, what actually happens is that you sow confusion.
I don't sow confusion. The journalists that interview me sow confusion.
Well,
the woman who wrote the New York
Times article. Why do you think that happens? That you get misinterpreted in your views so often?
With her, it was absolutely clear. I spent 2 days with her, and we spent 30 seconds talking about enforced monogamy, and she's a very smart woman, and she knew exactly what I meant and chose to make that the centerpiece of the article for I would say, to attract attention in a way that was completely inappropriate.
But you know, it's not just the journalists from the New York Times. You know that this happens over and over and over.
That's because the journalists read each other's journalism, and they don't read the books, and they don't watch what I'm saying.
Never with you. The fault is...
Well, no, the fault is sometimes with me. One of the ways that societies around the world have figured out that you keep young male aggression under control is by enforcing monogamous standards, because it gives everyone a chance in some sense. So that's the only point that I was making.
Meaning it clears more women will be available for one-on-one relationships, rather than one guy who is some, whatever, for whatever reason, some large figure in society.
Yeah, well, you see this happening in universities where women outnumber men. So the men hypothetically have more sexual opportunity, but that isn't what happens. What happens is that a small minority of men have all the sexual opportunity. A fairly large minority of men don't. The women are unhappy because they can't find a committed relationship. It's bad for most of the men, and the men who have all the sexual opportunity get cynical.
But isn't this in some ways against your whole idea of equality of outcome? Because you're talking about equality of sexual outcome now. If these men, if you have a guy like a LeBron James that's a dominant basketball player that just kicks everyone's ass, this is a guy who's succeeded at the highest level, right? Well, there's going to be people like that sexually. There's going to be people that are better at finding mates, and this is what they enjoy. They enjoy having many mates.
Yep,
they enjoy being, yes, but if this is what they enjoy, if it's a man who doesn't want a family and enjoys dating multiple women, why is that bad?
Well, I think the fundamental reason it's bad is because it's bad in the long run for children.
It's bad for children if he chooses to have children.
Yeah, well, that's it.
Sense.
But that's it. That's the fundamental issue as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
And I think it's the answer. Look, to give the journalist credit, that is the point she was making. Apart from pillaring me and caricaturing my perspective, that was the point she was making. Well, first of all, I'm not in favor of unbridled hierarchies. Like I already said, that the proclivity of a hierarchy is that all the spoils go to the person at the top, and that can destabilize the whole structure.
Yes.
So we have to have a dialogue about how to rectify that.
But how could you possibly rectify that if one man is, like say if we've got one 6'5" beautiful man who's got a perfect body and he's brilliant and he just wants to date a bunch of women, and all the rest of the people are 5'1" and they're fat and they're lazy, and like this guy's gonna, if this is the competition, he's going to win. There's no way around this. And even if you decide to have enforced monogamy, where it becomes a popular thing, the women are going to be more drawn to him. If he chooses to date them, they might decide, I would rather have him sometimes than never at all.
That is actually what does happen.
But what is wrong with that?
Well, what's wrong with it is that it destabilizes society and it's bad for children.
Right, you said that.
Yeah, but
what if they don't want to have children? But there's a lot of people that don't want to have children. There's a lot of people that choose to go their entire life without having children. There's men in their 30s. Some of my friends have vasectomies. They don't want children. So why would that help in any way, these involuntary celibates?
Well, I think you tilt the society so that it serves the interests of,
You don't accept the charge then that you, although you are an advocate for more order, that you're actually fomenting chaos, that you're quite deliberately fomenting chaos by
I'm certainly not deliberately fomenting it, because I don't enjoy deliberately fomenting chaos. I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to, because it's just so goddamn funny. I can't help but say it. I figured out how to monetize social justice warriors.
That is what it is.
I know, it's so funny. Your audience is primarily angry young white men. It's like, okay, fine. I've talked to about 350,000 people in the last year, and there hasn't been one untoward incident of any sort by any single one of the people who've come to my talks. And that's 350,000 people.
If Jewish individuals hated Christian Ukrainians enough to starve millions of them to death, could the same thing happen today? Could Jewish individuals use their position of power to seek out revenge against places like Europe and Russia that have a history of expelling Jews? Thank you again for your work. Just remember Rule 9, you know, it's like, maybe there's something here that you don't know about, you know? And I am trying to just speak the truth.
First of all, I haven't read this book, and I do want to read the book, so thank you for giving me the book.
You're welcome.
I can't do it.
That's okay.
So where's the aggression?
Yeah.
I'm defenseless against that kind of female insanity because the techniques that I would use against a man who was employing those tactics are forbidden to me.
I'll tell you a funny story, man. People will hate me for this one. So it's about orangutans. And so now a fully developed male orangutan is the guy that has the big fat pads around his face. So he almost looks like a moon, eh? And he's a big, tough character. And the big males get so big they actually can't hang around in trees. They spend most of the time on the ground, whereas the typical orangutan is up in the trees. And so it used to be thought, so there's only one of these males around in any given territory, and these big males. And then there's other males that kind of look like the females. And it used to be thought that all of those more juvenile-looking males were adolescents. But then they discovered that that wasn't true, that what happened was is if there was a dominant and fully developed male in the territory, then all of the other males didn't mature fully, and they stayed in their juvenile form. Now the female orangutans come to the big moon-faced guy. So they come for mating purposes to him. The juveniles have to resort to rape. And if you can't understand that from a human perspective, then you're not bloody well thinking.